global emissions growth. So between 2017 and 2018, coal emissions grew a little bit, but gas emissions grew so much more. In 2018, coal emissions globally shrunk a little bit, but gas continued to grow. So gas is now the fossil fuel that's growing the most and contributing the most to global CO2 emissions growth. And that's across sectors, not just in the power sector. So Marianne talked about this a lot, and that chart was much more user-friendly than mine, perhaps, but this is a chart from an organization called Lazard. They check that they kind of track the cost of financing, building, operating, and decommissioning different kinds of power plant technology. And they kind of use this analysis called a levelized cost of energy analysis. And they say, you know, if we build a gas plant or if we build a wind farm, what's that going to cost over the lifetimes? And what is going to be the cost of a unit of energy from that plant over the lifetime? And they've been tracking it since 2009. And in 2016, you can see at the bottom there, green and kind of yellow is wind and solar, and gas is that grey line. So wind and solar have been beating gas out since 2016, and that's been continuing into 2019, and it's projected to continue. So wind and solar, as Marianne said, are now cheaper than gas or coal, and that fundamentally changes this whole kind of outlook of, you know, do we need gas to support a clean energy transition? It's now very clear all across the world, and even in the United States, where gas is cheaper than anywhere in the world because of the glut that's being caused by the fracking boom. You know, wind and solar can still beat out gas in you know, the cheapest gas market in the world. So we can build out a new energy system, and it's not about cost. It's actually going to save consumers money, not cost us money. And then this is probably the pushback that you're going to hear most today. In fact, most of the gas industry and the electricity industry, they kind of, you know, they've woken up to the fact that renewables are cheaper. But their pushback now is that, well, renewables are intermittent, the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow, and we're going to need gas for many decades to come to support that energy transition. And again, that's a myth. And I think you even see BP, I think, advertising now that gas is the smart partner for renewables. Now, I stole this chart from the Rocky Mountain Institute. This came out after my report as well. That was bad timing. It's a really interesting report called The Growing Market for Clean Energy Portfolios. And they basically took all the proposed gas plants that are still sort of on the drawing board in the United States, 80-odd gas plants, tens and tens of billions of dollars potential investment. And they looked at the energy markets where those gas plants are going to be located, and they said, what would be the cost of not, you know, providing the energy service of that gas plant with portfolios of clean energy technology, right? So not just a wind farm or a solar farm, but recognizing that a gas plant is not an intermittent and variable technology. It can be turned on and off whenever you like, and wind and solar can't. So what is the cost of actually addressing that issue in all those locations where those gas plants are being proposed? And they found that in over 90% of those cases, of those proposed gas plants around the United States, clean energy portfolios would save consumers money and be cheaper. So what do they mean by clean energy portfolios? They obviously mean wind and solar farms, but, you know, and also distributed solar, rooftop solar, a whole array of clean energy technologies, batteries and other kinds of storage, and of course efficiency and demand response. So they put together these kind of packages and costed them out for all of these plants and found that it would be cheaper. And the chart I chose was actually in the northeast, northeast of the country, which is not exactly known for its solar resource. And you know, from 2019 onwards, the clean energy portfolios beat out a new gas power plant. So again, it's, you know, we're pushing back on these myths of, oh, well, gas is the smart partner for renewable energy. You can't just rely on renewable energy. You know, that when you actually dig down into this and study this, it's simply not the case. And you know, there are, the second part of those bullet points is really just talking about, I talk about this more in the report, about how the energy regulators need to really change the way they're thinking about these issues and change the way they're regulating energy markets to that. You know, they've got to send these long-term market signals like clean energy portfolios, and they've got to design markets to actually value things like efficiency and flexibility, and not just value a big centralized power plant, which is the kind of 20th century model. So that's really the technical details. And you know, the fifth point is just a very simple one that I think most of the people in this room recognize. But you know, we've spent in this country, companies have spent over $100 billion just building gas pipelines in the last decade, right? And not to mention the power plants and the fracking and the gas processing and all this other infrastructure, billions and billions of dollars. And that capital is sunk, and it locks in emissions over time because it's far more difficult to shut stuff down after you've built it. Not just, you know, from an advocacy point of view, we know about that. And politically, legally, and economically, once it's built, it tends to get locked in for a period. So it's better not to build it in the first place. So that's a whirlwind tour through the report, which is there and available on the website, and that's why gas is not clean, not cheap, and well necessary.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we've gotten a few questions in from the audience, and so I guess we'll just go ahead and get started. This is for anyone who wants to answer. What will a change in the White House and Congress mean after the election?
Well, using my power of positive thinking, if we had champions of both climate action and just transition in the White House and Congress, I think it could do a great deal. I mean, I think that there are a lot of gas proposals going forward and a lot of coal plants not retiring because the regulations are continuing to favor fossil fuels. Every pollution regulation affecting coal or gas, someone is trying to roll it back somewhere in the White House. And so I think if we had a climate champion in the White House, if we had climate leadership in Congress, there's a lot, even if we just had a climate champion in the White House, there's a long list of things they could do to really accelerate this transition. And there's a bill in Congress called the Reclaim Act that would put a lot of resources into economic development in Appalachia in particular for transitioning and restoring landscapes and helping to diversify the economy. And I think we would also see more leadership around, the scale of resources that we need to support coal communities is really a scale of resources that our country, the federal government, is uniquely positioned to provide. It's pretty hard for the private sector or the civil society sector of philanthropy to really do the job compared to the federal government. And so I think on both the transition to clean energy and on the just transition that we would have a lot more leadership and resources and progress.
Taisha or Lauren, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I'll add something. So if there was to happen to be a change in the White House, Chairman Grijalva and Senator McEachin are actually going to roll out an environmental justice bill this year. I think they're calling it the Environmental Justice Act at this point, which is also like a framework of how we're going to implement environmental justice in many facets of things. So if we have quite literally, if we have a bill that's going to be proposed, and then we have people that's going to vote on it, then we have a chance. And then we have actual teeth and legislation that will help us get there.
Yeah, and I would just add, around about 2016, we got to the point where oil and gas production in this country hit a level where the country cannot absorb anymore. At the end of 2015, the crude oil export ban, which had been in place since the energy crisis in the early 70s, was lifted. And reinstating that ban, or phasing it in some way, because I think if you brought it in overnight, there would definitely be transition issues. But most of the oil the production growth that has occurred since the ban was lifted has gone to export. In 2019, the US exported about 3 million barrels per day of oil. And a lot of that oil is now coming from the Permian Basin in Texas which has a lot of gas associated with it, and drilling for that oil is causing this kind of glut of gas, which is also being exported through you know, the LNG plants. But you know, just kind of that could be one tool in a suite of you know, policies and tools to constrain the oil and gas industry and try and get us back in line with climate goals.
Oh, one quick note. So Tasha just mentioned the Environmental Justice Act at the federal level, and I just wanted to say that if folks are interested in learning more or potentially commenting, there's going to be a webinar tomorrow at 1 p.m. where they will be talking about the bill and also letting folks know how to comment. If you're interested in that information, please just let me know after today, and I can make sure I send you the link to join the webinar. Back to our questions. So this question is for Lauren. Is divestment from fossil fuels making any difference?
That's a great question. I think it is. Certainly, you know, politically and in terms of the kind of, you know, the kind of, you know, social license of the industry is kind of crumbling, partly because of the, I think because of the divestment movement. You know, financially, you know, there's been some really huge numbers divested. And at the same time, you know, the sources of capital for the industry have kind of switched more to kind of, you know, hedge funds and private equity and stuff like this. And I think that's, you know, it is starting to have an impact. I think it has a long way to go, and you know, no one of these kind of tools is going to break the industry. I think it, you know, again, it's kind of part of the toolbox to kind of, you know, slowly break down what this industry is doing.
Anyone else want to contribute? Great. What policies should we support to ensure that underrepresented groups have equal access to clean energy? And this is for anyone.
Good question. Well, like I said, so the policy in the bill that's being put forward to codify the Environmental Justice Council for Virginia is a really good one. If you, like we were talking about on the federal level for that EJ bill that's coming out, there is a just transition part in that as well. And that includes representation. For us, like that, those go hand in hand. A just transition includes representation from the impacted people and the people that are from disenfranchised communities. Those are the two that I can think of right now.
I would just add that I know that in the Reclaim Act at the congressional level, and the same dynamic has played out at the local level, one of the key things to look for is does the community have a position of leadership in deciding how funds are going to be used? And so, you know, there could be federal money coming in for economic development in former coal mining communities that could just be used to do big pork barrel projects like federal prisons, which is not the kind of economic future that communities want. And there is also a different model where the communities are in the lead, and there have been different versions of the Reclaim Act over the years, just as one example. Some of them did have that role for community leadership, and some were lacking that, and so that's, I think, always an important thing to look for.
Now, we have a few questions about, I guess, the dynamic of the world, or the necessity of having fossil fuels as a backup for renewables. And so my question is, how are we working to change that dynamic? How do we respond to that criticism?
Briefly, I would say, again, the one example I gave of NIPSCO, the utility in Indiana, there's another example of a utility called Excel that is across the country, but it specifically had a coal plant in Colorado that they retired, and the portfolio of replacement was entirely wind, solar with storage, energy efficiency, and something you heard mentioned called demand response, which is better managing the electricity demand and making those peak times of demand a little less. And you know, we have a large electrical grid in the United States that is run by very smart engineers whose job is to keep the lights on. And there is an ability to move different types of electricity around the system at different times of day. And so we have a long way to go in adding renewables to the grid before we get to a point where there is actually a challenge of keeping the lights on. And especially here in this region, you know, we could get to 70–80% renewables before I think we, you know, really might start to face those challenges. And energy storage, whether it's batteries or other forms of energy storage, is, again, it is now, solar with storage is cheaper than existing coal in a lot of parts of the country. So energy storage is not some far off thing that we have to wait, you know, decades and decades to have it come to fruition. It's here, and as is the case with any kind of innovation like that, it's getting cheaper all the time and more effective all the time. So I think that is a handy argument for the fossil fuel industry, and particularly the gas industry, to make, to try to force us, as you have been forced here in Virginia, to deal with a bunch of new gas plants that actually aren't needed, but it is a convenient talking point to, you know, kind of make people afraid that we do need to build them. And so, yeah, anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, I think everything Mary Ann said is spot on, and you know, I think we've been kind of told that gas, you know, gas is necessary and we need it. And this is being driven by the fact that they have this glut of supply and they've made these investments. And so it's not about sort of, you know, what is the best technology, but it's about what's going to be most profitable for the power players in our particular state. And, you know, something that I think has made great progress here in Virginia has been the kind of pushback on Dominion's influence on this administration, on the state capital. And, you know, we have the technical know-how, we have the technology, and often we just don't have the political will, and politicians are too easily kind of buying into what their utilities are telling them, or what the gas industry is telling them. So I think, you know, on one side it's the technical spec of like how you deal with this problem, and on the other side it's the political issue of we need to get these people out of our government.
So the next question is for Tasha. What aspects of renewable energy development appeal to your legislators, and what are their concerns that we should take into consideration and address?
So it seems like what's very popular at this moment is solar, and we're looking at wind. It seems to be something politically that people can grab onto and they can understand, and that it's something people can get excited for. It's also part of that transition of like economic development that we can look at as well. And as for concern, it is that the way that things are being developed, who is included in that? Are we at that table when we're saying this solar plant's going to go here? Who's going to work there? Are people from somewhere else going to be coming in to take these jobs? Or is it going to be our people that can then transition into those? So solar, definitely looking at it, but always our concern is how is that happening? And who is that happening with?
Thank you. So this question is for Marianne. What does the phase out of coal look like in China, India, and other countries?
I just had the great privilege of going to a conference with coal advocates from all over the world in December. In a lot of places, the same economics I have been describing to you are at play, that renewables are increasingly the cheapest form of electricity all over the world. And in countries like India, you have these very expensive proposed coal plants, either partially under construction or on the drawing board, in the midst of a climate that's changing. And so they're sucking up a lot of water that's no longer going to farmers who are counting on that water. So there are a lot of both economic and climate change related and political barriers facing proposed and existing coal plants around the world. Europe has about the same amount of coal on the grid as we do here in the United States. There is a sister campaign called the Europe Beyond Coal campaign that is working on the same trajectory that we are to phase out all the coal in Europe by 2030. There's also this diplomatic alliance called the Powering Past Coal Alliance of countries and subnational entities like states and regions that have all pledged to phase out coal, and that's led by Canada and the UK. So there's quite a bit of momentum around the world for phasing out coal, and obviously China is a big center of coal mining and coal burning, and is a very hard place to be an activist. And so I think that the folks in China who are working very hard based on air pollution, based on climate change, to move their country away from coal towards clean energy have made a lot of progress, frankly. There are many coal mines and coal plants that have been on the drawing board there that no longer are, but they also need, I think, all the help and support they can get. And I think one of the most important things we can do here in the U.S. is provide the leadership to make it clear that a future beyond coal, just equitable transition to clean energy is the way of the future. And I think that kind of economic and political and sort of social leadership is probably one of the most important things that we can do to move the needle in China.
Thank you. And so I'm sorry we didn't have time for all of our questions, but the final one for today is kind of also thinking about the global frame. What brakes are available to stop international fossil fuel extraction? That's our last question for this afternoon. What brakes are available to stop international fossil fuel extraction?
I mean, I'm just thinking, what's going on internationally. I think Mary Ann talked about a lot of stuff that's going on in Asia, Europe, and coal. From the oil and gas side, we've been leading this thing. Country in Europe, with a very beautiful area which the Norwegian government wanted to open up to new oil and gas extraction. And there's been this sort of coalition of academics and activists, and in some cases financial analysts who kind of signed on to this declaration of leaving oil and gas in the ground, becoming certain countries becoming first movers in declaring resources, oil and gas reserves kind of off limits. New Zealand has done that for its offshore oil and gas. Small countries like Costa Rica and Belize have foregone oil and gas development. So has France. So there's this kind of push to encourage countries to kind of come out and acknowledge that we can't continue to expand fossil fuel extraction and to sign on to this push. That's one example I can think of. Mary Ann may have many more.
I would just add that getting our own house in order here in this country and providing that leadership is essential. And as the climate crisis worsens, I think the pressure on fossil fuel reserves all over the world is going to increase as we have more Australias and more Amazons burning. And we're going to have our work cut out for us. This is a very powerful, very entrenched industry that's not going to give up its market share without a whole lot of really smart and determined advocacy.
Yeah, I guess if we're talking about it's this, what we're doing here. This is what it takes. It's talking to our legislators, it's streaming the videos, it's communication. We have to get the message out, and we have to stand by it, and we have to be we have to be serious about it. This is not what we want, and this is not how it's going to work. And we have something better. And we just have to, I think that's really what it comes down to, is we have to share in that belief.
Well, let's give our panelists one final And next up will be Harrison Wallace with CCAN with a few announcements.
Mike's going to close us out. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. First off, let's give one more round of applause for this great panel. I have a couple events I want Next Wednesday, January 22nd, will be the Day for All People by the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy. It will be over at Centenary United Methodist Church, about the same time as this event, 7:30 to 3. You can find it on Facebook, just search Day for All People. So another great opportunity to lobby your legislators. And then Tuesday, January 28th, 2 weeks from today, will be the VCN Conservation Lobby Day, where we'll be expanding not only clean energy, but all other things, water, land use, transportation, going after the whole gamut. That will be in this building, 7:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. So if you want to come back and talk to your legislators, two great opportunities. And then if you're not leaving right now to go home, I would highly recommend that you guys head over to the Capitol building. The entrance is down there on Bank Street. Right now, the Senate Privilege and Elections Committee is hearing SB 25 and SB 266. Those bills would ban public utilities from giving money to politicians. Sponsored by Senator Chad Peterson. We would love your support. So once we're done here, I encourage you to go all over to Bank Street, go in that building, and testify for that bill when you come up. So here's Mike Timlow to close us out. Thanks again for coming.
All right, y'all. Thanks for sticking out. We have less than 60 days. We have less than 60 days to make the law happen. And before you go, I want to thank our sponsoring groups, CCAN, Sierra Club, Interfaith Power and Light, Clean Virginia, and all the other sponsoring groups. Thank you. Thanks for coming from Nova, from Southside, Southwest, Hampton Roads, the Valley, RPA, Seville. Thank you all for coming. Look, here's the thing. Y'all remember in September 2014 when Tom Farrell of Dominion and Terry McAuliffe had a press conference and announced they were going to build the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. And no one thought that we could stop that pipeline, even delay it. Why? Because Dominion wanted the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. And they wanted it running fully, Lauren Lynn, by like the end of 2018. And last I checked, it hasn't been built yet.